Welcome to my castle. Pleased to meet you. I am the master of the castle.
Give back Sarah!
Do not rush. Your lady is here.
Sarah! Why? Why won't she answer?
It seems the lady is tired. It seems you are too. Rest a while.
What?
Castlevania Lament of Innocence is a third-person action-adventure game developed by Konami and released in 2003 for the PlayStation 2. It's considered the third 3D Castlevania after the N64 releases of Castlevania 64 and Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. I don't think that should count as two games. I've never played it, but Legacy of Darkness is apparently just an expanded version of Castlevania 64 with a prequel and a few more bosses and maybe a longer storyline. But it was released in the same year, and I think that just means you weren't done when the teacher came around to collect homework. Personally, I've always enjoyed the Castlevania series, especially that Netflix anime, but I struggled with the classic 2D games as a child. That was until I found the Game Boy Advanced Area of Sorrow that still sits as my personal best Castlevania game ever. If the albino femboy wasn't enough to get you in a white van, the soul collection mechanic was an excellent bag of candy to convince the child in me. Sadly, this video isn't about that game, it's about this game, and there will be spoilers for this game, so that's the warning. Lament of Innocence is the first of two Castlevania games on the PS2. It came out in the same year as Area of Sorrow, so that's one strike against it, but it's still reviewed well and I won't bury the lead. It's still a pretty fun game. The combat and zones are a little repetitive, but the game itself is only like 8 hours long, so at least it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's also got one of the strongest stories in the series as far as I've seen, though that's probably because they stole it from Berserk. That's never held Dark Souls back, so you won't hear me crying about it. It really does feel like a 2D Castlevania stretched onto a 3D skin, for better or worse. The environments, enemies, sub-weapons, and even the pause menu are brought over wholesale from the earlier games. That pause menu is an especially strange one because it has all these stats that are completely unused. Lament of Innocence doesn't have an experience when the enemies die, you can't level up, and the equipment doesn't have stats. Instead, armor provides a flat reduction to damage, and you unlock those armors based on how much of the map you've explored rather than story progression. Some accessories will still directly affect abilities like the aroma earrings. They say they increase Leon's intelligence by 25%, so you might think that relates to mana or magical relics, but it's actually a 25% increase to the damage your sub-weapons do. It's not a big deal, but it could have just said that instead of trying to make these stats relevant. Another consistency from the 2D games is the composer from Symphony of the Night, Michiru Yamane, I'm sorry that I'm sure that's wrong, also composed the soundtrack for this game, and it's great. It mixes classic Castlevania themes with dance beats in a style that was surprisingly effective. I usually don't say too much about the audio in games because I lack the vocabulary for that kind of criticism. I'm not really sure how much value you could get out of me saying, "It sounds good, I guess." But my favorite track is probably from the first area, and I can give it to you as an example. There are some parts that I'm not really a fan of, but it could just be that it goes over my head or it isn't my style. One in particular is this part that plays in the final area. I spent a lot of time in here, and it feels like when you're playing music and you get off beat, so you just gotta keep kinda noodling around for a few measures to try and land it. I'm not the professional composer in the room, and I'm not trying to talk bad about it, but after hearing that 100 times, it did kinda wear on me. Lament of Innocence, or Loy as no one has ever called it, is chronologically the first game in the series despite being the 20th release according to the list on Wikipedia. Set in the year of Someone's Lord 1094 AD, the game opens with white text on a white background. This is a genius bit of game design because it communicates to the player that this game does not give one single fuck about you. It does set the scene, but it's boring in a YouTube video, so I'll summarize it for you. Our protagonist Leon, nope, not that one. This Leon came out 2 years earlier and his hair is just fabulous. It's got a real glam rock thing going. Leon Belmont and his lifelong friend Matthias lead a group of soldiers under the command of the church. The band has never been defeated due to the combination of Leon's martial prowess and Matthias's keen tactical mind. It's said that Matthias is so incredibly intelligent that he is able to read. That puts him above 21% of the adults in America. Look it up. But you know they still vote. Returning home from a successful campaign, Matthias finds out that his wife has died from disease. Since this is somewhere in medieval Europe, it's safe to assume that she contracted this while wiping her ass with her bare hands and then licking them clean. He was so upset with the loss of his wife that he couldn't get out of bed for over a year. Leon's able to hold down the fort while his friend grieves, but suddenly an army of monsters invades his homeland. He asks the church if he can take his soldiers to defend his countrymen, but the church says no, you've got brown people to kill. Matthias puts on pants long enough to tell Leon that the monsters were being sent by the vampire who lives in a forest known as Eternal Night, and that they've kidnapped Leon's fiancée, Sarah. Did you read that in one of your books, Matt? Leon immediately quits his job, abandons his title, and leaves his sword behind, running off into the forest to save the woman he loves. That info dump only gets us to the main menu, but go ahead and name your save something like Phallus and we can get back to it. On the way to the vampire's castle, Leon feels a surge of power and meets an old man. He's disappointed to see that it's not a bear, but approaches him anyway and learns that the vampire has made it so that he can't leave. The man introduces himself as Ronaldo Gandolfi, because while this game is a lot of things, subtle is not one of them. He invites Leon back to his cabin where he gives him a weapon, some magic, and the name of the vampire who kidnapped Sarah.
Walter Bernhard.
Seriously, this dude's name is Walter Bernhard? What kind of name is Walter for a vampire? Alright, sorry, moving on. Leon asks about alchemy, saying that he doesn't really know much about it, and Ronaldo tells him that the only person in the world who really knows alchemy is Matthias. Which surprises Leon, but Ronaldo says that he's known Matthias longer than Leon has. Matthias's family has passed down a book full of alchemy's greatest secrets for generations. Finally, he tells Leon that the door to the throne room is guarded by 5 powerful monsters, and that he'll have to kill them before he can face Daryl. So that's our exposition out of the way, and now you can start playing the game. When you enter the castle, there's 3 ways you can go, but one of them's the locked door that you can't get through yet, so really there's only 2, and one leads to a tutorial section for movement and combat. The other is a hallway with a save point that leads you to the level selection room, and this hallway is really important. It's probably the best hallway in the game, and I'll tell you why. If you stand on this section of carpet and go into the item menu, every item you highlight is duplicated. All of them. Fuck farming for coins to buy consumables. Go back to Ronaldo, buy 1 gem, duplicate it, and sell 8 to Ronaldo. Repeat until you have a full stack of every consumable. This will save you tons of pointless farming between bosses later in the game. You know, Jesus used an item dupe on fish and bread, and you can too. Thanks, random hallway.
I appreciate your business.
Through the next door is the main hub that leads you to pick where you want to go in the castle. And you might notice another door that you didn't come through, but you don't need to worry about that yet.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
If you're curious enough to go down there anyway, it's a long set of stairs that lead you to another locked door. Instead, if you go up onto that goat head platform, you'll see 5 teleporters, and you can go into any of them that you want right now. But the floating item pickup guides us into the middle one, and gets us a map to that location as well. Now, map pickups in this game aren't super useful. They don't show the full area or secrets. At best, they'll give you a general idea of the direction of the boss room, but even that's not really very helpful. You'd usually be better off just wandering in whatever direction you chose. The gameplay is pretty standard Castlevania, but with the obvious caveat that this is a 3D build of a 2D blueprint. Apparently, some reviewers felt that the levels themselves were too repetitive in their designs, but I think that's kind of disingenuous. I'm not trying to say they're wrong, per se, but if you played any other Castlevanias, you know that they generally have large sections of the map that all have the same theme. This was useful so you'd know when you wandered into a new section, because enemies would generally be scaled based on the area of the map to kind of nudge you down a certain progression route. It's not possible to wander between areas in this game, and I think that's kind of a bummer because it makes the map feel like a less coherent space. But it's not like this game is committing some sin of repetition that the others didn't. There are 6 main regions of the game besides the castle entrance with Ronaldo's house and the orbs. Once you clear these 5 teleporters, you unlock the last area behind that locked door in the entryway. Or is it a foyer? After exploring the level and defeating its boss, you'll get an orb, but 3 of the 5 also come with some little lore bit that progresses the story. Like I said, do them however you like, but for the sake of conversation, I've ordered them in the way that I think makes the most sense from a story perspective. The first 2 don't have any extra lore to go along with them. In the House of Sacred Remains, you wander through destroyed chapels, and the boss is a giant undead parasite in a room made of flesh. Despite having no prior experience with magic or monsters, Leon takes this in stride. In the Anti-Soul Mysteries lab, we reanimate and then deanimate a large stone golem. That's pretty standard. In the Ghostly Theater, Leon faces a succubus. She's probably the most terrifying enemy in the game because I had to keep checking over my shoulder to make sure my kids didn't walk in. Then I'd have to start explaining, it's not like that. Daddy's playing this for YouTube. No, you can't be her for Halloween. After she's defeated, she tells Leon that she should have fought him looking like Sarah, and then she could have beaten him like she did Ronaldo. Leon brings this up, and Ronaldo tells the story of how Jason turned his daughter into a vampire. Ronaldo had to kill her after she murdered his wife and son. Then he came to the castle to kill Dave, but failed, and that's why he stayed here. Philip lets him help the other adventurers because it makes the game of killing them more fun. That sucks, man, but if you feel like giving it another shot, let me tell you about this hallway. The Dark Palace of Waterfalls is a large aqueduct beneath the castle where you can have fun on water slides and fight a doppelganger. At the end, Leon meets Jakeem Armster, and you cannot convince me that this isn't a JoJo's reference. Jakeem used to work for Jared, but he tried to overthrow him, and when he lost, he got thrown down into this watery prison. This is apparently operating under the vampires can't cross running water mythos, but I've never really known that to matter in the Castlevania games before. Jakeem tells Leon that he couldn't defeat Nathan because of the Ebony Stone and that it's the source of the eternal night in the forest. After Leon defeats him, he wishes that he had the Crimson Stone. And as an aside, I don't know what this is called in writing, but I love when a character has to just yell out key pieces of information unprompted because someone didn't know how to work it into the story naturally. Leon returns to Ronaldo to ask about the stones. Apparently, they were both made by accident while trying to create the Philosopher's Stone. That's the Sorcerer's Stone if you're in the US. It is said to grant eternal youth to its owner, and it's always been the greatest legend in alchemy. Damn. If only we knew someone who was really good at alchemy. I bet they could even read. The Ebony Stone makes eternal night, which makes vampires stronger, and the Crimson Stone absorbs the souls of vampires and uses them to grant power to its owner. But both stones were supposedly lost a long time ago, so don't worry about them. This whole conversation was probably just a waste of time. Speaking of time, in the garden forgotten by time, Leon faces Medusa. After she's defeated, she tells him that his whip is stronger than it used to be, and asks if it's reached its final form. Ronaldo tells Leon, don't worry about that, and that it's impossible right now anyway. With the Guardians defeated, the door to Tyler is open. Leon jumps to attack, but can't even put a scratch on him. Laughing, the vampire throws Sarah at him and leaves. Leon takes her back to Ronaldo, but she collapses on the way, and they find out that she's already been bitten and she's turning into a vampire. The only way to save Sarah is to kill Mike, but the whip isn't strong enough. Ronaldo says that the secret to unlocking the whip's final form is to kill Sarah, and then we'll be able to kill Tom and save Sarah. Wait a minute. Sarah overhears this conversation and begs Leon to sacrifice her so that he can kill Josh, and then no one else will have to suffer like they have. With no other alternative, that's what they do. This upgrades the Whip of Alchemy to the legendary and aptly named Vampire Killer. This is fine, but it's kind of a shame that Sarah barely feels like a character. I mean, she's not a character. She's motivation. But she could have been a character. I would have rather Leon found Sarah near the beginning of the game, and then when he tried to take her away from the castle, she couldn't leave because she was bitten. That gives him the same kill Walter to save her quest, and the whip could have been upgraded by absorbing the souls of the Guardians. Maybe then, when Leon faces Mark, he could try to use her as a shield, and you could do the whole, "Kill us both, my love. I'm already lost. Make it so no one else will feel this pain. I will always love you." As it is now, the urgency of saving her is kind of lost while I'm dicking around pushing statues, and then she just immediately dies as soon as she's found. Anyway, Leon is filled with determination. Finally, we have access to the last area of the castle, and yes, it does feel like padding. The Pagoda of the Misty Moon is a fucking stupid name, but what else did I expect from a vampire named Walter? It finally has enemies of a higher difficulty, but the bigger problem will be the backtracking. If you're going for completion, there's a secret room on the west side of the upper level that gives you the Unlock Jewel. This is what we needed to open that locked door in the basement near the teleporters. If you decide to venture into those depths, be prepared for an entirely optional but difficult boss fight. He's a 3-stage monstrosity known as the Forgotten One, and he's so brutal that according to Kogi Igarashi, or Iga to Castlevania fans, he's the sole reason that the game was moved up to an M rating. Though I think the succubus might have had something to do with that too. The Forgotten One feels more like a fight out of Ninja Gaiden than this game, and he's weakest to the Ice Whip if you've been chasing secrets. If you do overcome him, you'll be given the Ebony Orb. You don't need it, but it does give you some cool moves for the sub-weapons. Whether you choose to go after the optional boss or not, we're ready to face Timothy. And he's still a smug little bastard until the first time you smack him with a vampire killer. The game suddenly feels a lot more fair, and Hank isn't a fan of that. Once he's defeated, he claims that he'll just use his powers to come back to life, but then Death himself shows up to take his soul. He offers up that soul to the Master of the Crimson Stone. It looks suspiciously like that red face stone from Berserk that I'm not gonna pretend I can pronounce. And then our little Griffith shows up. He admits that this was all his plan. He chose to betray his allies and sacrifice the main character's love interest to obtain godlike powers in a completely original story. Don't look it up. The dialogue itself isn't great, but I respect how much the voice actors were putting into it.
Matthias.
Leon, after what you've been through, you should know.
Yes, you're right. I do understand how you feel. I too.
Then come with me. I will give you eternity too.
You wretched fool.
What?
Is this what the woman you loved would have wanted? The Matthias I know would not have loved such a woman.
Elisabetta was a kind, honorable woman. She was concerned only for me to the very end. That is why I hate him! Am I wrong? Did you not defeat Walter with hatred in your heart too?
Yes, I'd be lying if I claimed otherwise. But defeating him... no. Preventing others from suffering the same cursed fate. That was Sarah's dying wish. Granting my beloved's wish. That is all I can do to prove my love to Sarah. Eternity without her would be nothing but emptiness.
This hurts Matthias's little feelings, so he turns into a bat and leaves. Leon has to fight Death instead. Admittedly, it's a pretty cool looking boss fight. Death, appropriately, is pretty tough, but he only has a few moves. Once he's defeated, Death tells Leon that he'll return as long as his master survives, so Leon tells him to deliver a message.
You have become a cursed being, and I will never forgive you. This whip and my kinsman will destroy you someday. From this day on, the Belmont clan will hunt the night!
The castle collapses around Leon as he escapes, and the sun rises on Ronaldo for the first time in what we can assume is 5 years. After the credits, we get a little epilogue about how Matthias went into hiding, took the name Dracula, and the Belmont clan didn't see him again for several hundred years. That part's kinda weird because you're kinda walling off a lot of possible stories there, but okay. Chronologically, the next game in the series is Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, which apparently is the game that the Netflix series is based on, but that's a story for another day. Now that you've completed the game, you can start a new save with the name Joachim to play as the boss from the water area with his cool floaty swords, or there's a hard mode. If you finish the game as Joachim, you can also play as Pumpkin, but
ain't nobody got time for that.
There was really only one main pain point in the game that makes it hard to recommend to all but the most dedicated Castlevania lore buffs, and that's the camera. The game takes obvious inspiration from Devil May Cry, and the fixed point and on-rail camera angles work fine for combat. It gives you an expanded view of the action, but at the same time, the rest of the game kinda suffers for it. I feel like a key component to the Castlevania games has always been that sense of exploration, but because you can't control the camera, there were several times when I would miss a secret ledge above a character that I just couldn't see. It also makes it more difficult to aim when you're platforming, and probably the biggest problem for me personally is that whenever you're running through the castle, a large portion of that time you'll be forced to run at the camera. So while you have a good view of what's behind you, you can't see the enemies that are winding up to hit you from the front. Without a compass or a mini-map, it's really easy to get turned around. The fixed camera jumps as you load between zones, and it can be difficult to tell which direction you're going even with the map. You'll often need to check in each room just to make sure that the door you're heading towards is the way you actually wanted to go. Thankfully, that combat overall is pretty easy with the exception of some of the later bosses. And yes, I am aware that that opinion is built on the fact that I duplicated every healing item in the game, but again, I don't feel bad for that, because healing items were already unlimited. You just have to be willing to spend a lot of time killing low-level enemies to get them, and I was not. The designers tried to build out a combo-based combat system, again similar to Devil May Cry, but with a much smaller move list, and without the unlimited ranged attack options of Ebony and Ivory. Instead, they implemented the sub-weapons from the older Castlevania games like daggers and holy water. They're iconic and interesting, but I have a strong preference for the axe, so I barely used anything else. You still power those sub-weapons using the hearts that you collect by destroying purple candles, and they respawn in between zones, so again, you never have to worry about running out, you just have to be willing to spend the time. The coolest thing about the combat system is part of the sub-weapons, and I can really only call it the orb system. When you defeat an area boss, you'll pick up colored orbs, and there are two others outside of that, the white and black orbs. The white orb is just laying around in a secret room, the black orb you get from that optional boss. Sub-weapons have a default attack, but you can choose to equip an orb that'll change them in some cool ways. As an example, the axe by default throws out two axes that cross each other while they fly, but one orb makes them circle Leon like a tornado, while another will cause him to charge forward with a slicing kick. It's stuff like that. Then there are magical relics like Ronaldo told you about. They could have brought a lot of flexibility to the combat system as a secondary source of magical attack or a utility, because they use a separate secondary resource from the sub-weapons in the form of that mana bar. But, with the exception of the first relic, they're generally just buffs like damage or movement speed, so they weren't really very useful. Overall, Lament of Innocence was a pretty fun game. I'd recommend it, but it's currently only available on PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, so you know, go buy that at your local Walmart, I guess. Konami doesn't give a shit about any game that doesn't run on a pachinko machine, so it's basically lost forever until they decide they want to re-release it. I've heard good things about Curse of Darkness, which is the other PS2 3D Castlevania game, but if you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know that I have a real hard time doing any sequels. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Later. Heyo, the video's over and you know what that means. Or at least I hope you do, because I sure don't. I might try to highlight some other creators in the outro. I know if you made it this far, you've probably got me on the second monitor, which is where I like to be. But maybe you're running out of my videos and you need someone else to keep you company. So here's one you might not have heard of. Mozillo Games. I recognize that their avatar might make you think that this is a channel ran by a teenager in the 2000s, but I'm in no position to judge. I'm just a skeleton. Underneath that MS Paint face though, there's a lot of passion for games of all types. And that dude is putting in 100 times the effort on every video compared to mine. If you don't mind a more, eclectic sense of humor, they might be something you enjoy. And if you do mind that, well, what the fuck are you still doing here? Tell them Cal sent you. They'll have no clue what that means. Thank you, genuinely, to everyone who watches and shares my stuff. Thank you for subscribing, and for all the comments. COVID killed my already barely functioning social skills, but I read them all and then stress for hours about how to respond because I'm some kind of weirdo, I guess. Also, apparently YouTube will just randomly hide comments, and the only way for me to find them is to go into each video and sort by newest, so if I didn't respond to you, that's probably why. Unless it's one of those DEI guys, in which case I'm not really sure what they expected to happen from those comments. Alright, that's all I've got. I don't know how to end this, but it feels weird to use the same sign off twice at the end of a video, so bye!